Dawnbringer, Book 1, Chapter 13, Questions Unanswered. The guards are gone from the entrance to the barrow when Eldarien, Rorlain and Malrune step into the light of day. They look around cautiously, blinking in the brilliance of the midday sun, and try to decide what to do.
Do you think the rest of the company survived?
Malrune asks anxiously.
I fear not.
Rorlain answers, his voice soft and hoarse after everything that he has seen. This is twice now in a short amount of time that he has tasted the closeness of death in the dark places under the earth.
To all appearances, Ierendal was the only one to leave the cave besides ourselves. Perhaps the creatures took them as well.
Eldarien interjects hesitantly but firmly.
They did not survive.
How do you know?
Malrune asks.
Their remains were scattered upon the floor of the great hall. Neither of you saw it.
I was occupied with other things.
Rorlain observes.
Understandably.
Eldarien says, turning to look upon his friend.
I also want to thank you for saving my life.
I will be here for you to the end, Eldarien.
Rorlain replies, with a gentle smile, which dispels the fear that has lingered in his face until this moment.
The bond of blood and life shall endure, and if I can protect you by any righteous means at my disposal, even with my own life and blood, I shall not hesitate to do so.
At a loss for words, Eldarien simply nods silently.
You said...
Begins Malrune, after a few short moments, visibly moved by Rorlain's words as well.
You said that they did not survive.
Yes,
replies Eldarien.
I do not know what happened while we were in the tunnels, but they were all there. It looks as if Ierendal was unable to subdue that creature or engage it in dialogue until it was too late for his men. I am sorry, Malrune. I know they were your company.
I know that talking is important,
interrupts Rorlain.
But perhaps we should find a more sheltered and hidden place before we continue this conversation.
That is wise,
Malrune says.
Would it be acceptable if I went with you, at least until we decide what to do concerning this incident?
Yes,
says Eldarien.
There are also some questions I wish to ask you, if I may.
Of course, let us go.
Where shall we go?
Rorlain asks.
Our travelling gear is still in Falstead.
Eldarien says.
It is not the most secret place, but it will be hard to make it far without our supplies.
Yes, to Falstead then,
says Rorlain.
And if we run across Ierendal, it may indeed be for the best. It would be good to nip in the bud whatever has begun to grow here this day.
It has not just begun.
Malrune whispers, and the other two look at him in surprise.
But I shall tell you more of that when we have come to a more fitting location.
The path through the woods back to the ruins of Falstead is without incident, though Eldarien experiences a wave of weakness and fatigue wash over him as they walk, and he knows that Rorlain must feel the same. Not only have they experienced a multitude of emotions this morning, ranging from fear to anger, from terror to relief, but they also have not eaten since the evening before. Now that the immediate threat has passed, Eldarien feels shaky, as if his legs could easily give way beneath him. Judging by the position of the sun, it looks to be about an hour or an hour and a half after noon when they enter the bounds of Falstead. The night before they had slept in the remains of a gutted building, one that provided the most shelter possible. And here they return, collapsing beside their belongings and, after a moment of respite, rummaging through them for rations, bread, and dried meat, which they freely share with Malrún. At first, none of them are inclined to speak, and they eat in silence. Orlain is the first to talk, his hands laid across his lap and his body hunched over as if carrying a heavy weight.
Are these creatures human?
He asks.
Or were they at one point? And if so, what are they now?
I don't think a man can ever be anything but a man, even in death.
Eldarien answers, after a moment for thought.
Though he may be raised up unto light or debased unto darkness. Are these men who have become wedded to darkness? But if so, how do they live? For light alone is life. What force has brought them back to life, or brought them to life for the first time?
You are right. They don't feel like.
Orlain rubs his forehead and sighs before concluding,
They don't feel like human beings.
Like the distant echo of human beings?
Exactly. A mockery, like a puppet show.
Do you know anything, Malrún?
Eldarien asks, turning to him.
You said that not everything we encountered today was a first discovery.
I do know something,
He replies, shifting uneasily.
but I too must thank you for saving my life.
It seems you have saved us as well, good sir.
Eldarien says,
You could have acted very differently than you did today.
How do we know that we can trust you?
Orlain asks.
Until now we have been companions in fear and the desire for survival. But what now that we have found some peace? What do you bring in your heart?
Orlain,
Eldarien says before Malrún has a chance to answer.
is suspicion the appropriate response at this time?
I think that it is. We have no grounds at all to trust Malrún.
Except that he spared our lives and gave us our weapons freely.
Yes, and this he did only to save his own life.
May I speak?
Malrún begins, interrupting the exchange between the two men. They turn to him, and Eldarien says,
Of course.
It is right of you to be suspicious of me,
He continues,
for I have given you little cause for trust until this moment. It is true, what I did in the barrow was spurred on by fear, but I mean that in more ways than one. I was afraid not only of those creatures, let us call them Druidak, for that is what all have taken to calling them in rumor, though few know what they really are. But I was also afraid before the creatures ever appeared, afraid of doing what I ought.
Eldarien nods his head silently at these words, as if they are exactly what he had expected. Malrún continues,
I am a coward. I admit it freely, with shame of face and heart. For I knew that our purpose in coming to the barrow, and our plans in your regard, Sir Captain, Eldarien, were amiss. Allow me to speak with you now about precisely these things. Then you may give trust freely or not, as you see fit.
Very well.
Orlain replies.
I assure you that I shall judge you fairly.
As shall I.
Eldarien adds,
As I was in a similar situation to yours not many months ago.
Orlain steals a glance at Eldarien, as if to urge him to withhold even this judgment until the story has been told. Malrún clasps his hands tightly and anxiously across his breast and begins.
Justice has fled from the land.
He pauses, as if startled that his words came from his mouth so clearly and so viscerally.
Forgive me. I speak of an awareness, an experience, that I have had for a long time, but of which it has been taboo to speak, forbidden under threat of great penalty. I am a guardian of the law, a servant of justice, or I was supposed to be. But what does one do when the law that one serves is being betrayed by the very ones whose authority exists to protect it, to apply it with righteousness and moderation? Indeed.
He hesitates again, as if struggling either to decisively make a judgment or to speak it out loud.
Not only is the law being betrayed, but corruption has come to touch the law itself. If beforehand the failings were of individual men against the justice of the law, since the law is within the power of men to change, the law itself can come to express not the nature of goodness that binds us all, but the wishes of the few who are in power.
And you say this has happened or is happening?
Rorlane asks.
Yes.
Are you referring to the law of the Empire, or to the laws of the clans of Telmerion?
Asks Eldarien.
The Empire.
Malrún replies,
Though the clan leaders, as far as I know, have no choice but to go along with whatever the legate decides, or what he communicates from the Emperor.
Why?
Rorlane inquires.
I know not. All I can say is that the lawbringers have begun executing justice upon the heads, not of those whose crimes are more grievous or more inimical to the good of all, but whose aims seem contrary to the sovereign rule of the Empire and, certain other aims which those in the capital of Brughill feel, but the nature of which we know nothing about.
You really cannot speak more specifically about these aims?
Asks Eldarien.
I'm afraid not.
Malrún sighs.
As you have seen today, there is a plot that finds its origin in the highest reaches of the Empire. That is, if Irilof's words are true. He speaks in the name of the Emperor himself, seeking the aid of these Druadak, these creatures, to bring violence upon the cities and settlements of Telmerion.
He's probably reacting to the violence of the rebellion,
Rorlane states.
and seeking a means to crush all resistance to 200 years of virtually unquestioned rule. That is easy to do when you live across the sea and never see the faces of those whose lives shall be destroyed by the violence which you command.
But the means of doing so?
Eldarien emphasizes.
How could he intend to buy victory at such a price?
It is a terrible cost.
Rorlane agrees.
Considering what we saw today, there are so many questions. And knowing these creatures, how could anyone expect them to fight on the side of men? It seems to me that all they know how to do is destroy.
That is just the thing.
Malrún says,
This is not the first time that the Druadak have made themselves known, though their activity has occurred mainly to the west of the Teldrin Mountains, around the location of Minstead, where the rebellion began. It is, however, the first time that I have seen them in the flesh, and they are
He closes his eyes and draws in a deep breath.
terrifying beasts.
So you are implying that they do take orders from the Emperor or his legates?
Eldarien asks.
I think we saw as much today in person,
Rorlane interjects.
though I do admit that only one of them, perhaps their leader, seemed at all amenable to dialogue and cooperation. Perhaps the rest simply blindly obey their leader.
I wish I knew who or what their leader was.
Says Malrún.
He was intelligent, though not a man, not a living man, and not the size of man either.
He felt like more than a man,
Eldarien says softly and pensively.
and yet also so much less.
What do you mean?
I mean that he was more powerful, even perhaps greater in intellect, greater in the capacity to control events and to force his will. But he was wholly lacking in goodness, wholly devoid of truth, if it may be put that way.
It may indeed.
Says Rorlane.
I think we all felt it, though you perhaps more clearly than either of us. We have seen the way that your blade glows upon contact with the forces of darkness. This only deepens my firmness of purpose and my gratitude in following you and aiding you in whatever way I may.
But a single sword is as nothing against hordes of the undead, or whatever they may be.
Aye,
Malrún says,
but it was a great aid in saving us this day.
The three men sit silently for a long moment, each caught up in his own thoughts and feelings, the afternoon sun wheeling slowly overhead and warming the forested valley pleasantly. Eldarien breaks the silence when he says,
So let us return to what we have established. It appears that there is an agreement of sorts, whether one side is coercing the other, or both are benefiting from the arrangement, between the Empire, I assume, considering the evidence, the very person of the Emperor, and these creatures of darkness. And somehow the imperial leaders have succeeded in enlisting their might in the service of crushing the rebellion. This, it seems to me, is the import of their targeting Ristfand next. Malrun's words about the activity of the Druidach around Minstead strengthens this conviction, for according to my limited knowledge, the two centres of the rebellion—
He glances quickly at Rorlane and then looks away.
—are Minstead and Ristfand.
That has become common knowledge,
Confirms Malrun.
Only a few weeks ago, an overthrow of the imperial government was attempted within the ghetto of the city. It was swiftly put to a stop, but marked the beginning of open rebellion in Ristfand.
So now the manifest activity of the rebels has spread across the mountains and is no longer located only along the Finistra range.
Rorlane asks.
Yes,
Replies Malrun.
it had remained a small-scale conflict for years, more territorial than anything else, though we, or rather the Empire, forgive me, suspected that it had deeper roots and would spread.
And now that it has, they intend to take drastic measures.
Eldarien says.
Exactly.
Malrun agrees.
But perhaps they also wish to benefit from this rebellion.
How?
Rorlane asks.
What does the Empire have to gain that it does not already possess?
A just question.
With this, Malrun rises to his feet and begins to pace back and forth slowly, clearly trying to follow a train of thought. Eldarien sits and thinks as well, while Rorlane draws out his water skin and drinks deeply of its contents.
How do you know about the revolt in Ristfand, Malrun?
Rorlane asks after a while. Malrun stops pacing and turns to Rorlane, responding,
Carrier pigeon.
But why you? Weren't you following our trail during that time?
No, I wasn't.
Malrun explains.
We were in Igni at the time. We only picked up your trail in the woods of Carafel. You see, Lord Ierendal is one of the most important players in the Empire, and remains informed of all major events.
So he received a carrier pigeon while in Igni.
Eldarien says.
And you were in Igni for me.
Correct,
Answers Malrun.
We arrived after you had already departed. It is a good thing that you had not lingered there any longer than you did, I suppose. Even today it appears that you were saved only by bizarre chance. Without the intervention of those terrible creatures, I fear what would have happened to you.
Chance.
Sighs Eldarien thoughtfully, remembering again the words of Hyliana.
It is indeed most fortunate that things aligned as they did, though I grieve for those men who lost their lives in the process.
As do I.
Malrun affirms.
I see clearly now the injustice of your condemnation. You are not a threat to the Empire, and indeed, I hesitate to say it, but it seems the Empire is a threat to the people of Telmerion.
So we may yet need to be a threat to the Empire.
Rorlane interjects.
If we must choose sides, you certainly know where I shall stand.
And though both of us have previously stood on the other side of the line,
Malrun responds.
I think you will find us now standing with you, Rorlane.
I loathe war,
Eldarien says.
and wish that there was some way to prevent it. But what I have witnessed today is beyond anything I could have expected or imagined. I do not intend to be a threat to the Empire, but I will stand and fight for our people if the forces of darkness, and an empire aligned with darkness, seek to conquer and destroy us.
It sounds like we all agree.
Malrun observes.
However, unlike Eldarien, I am not hesitant to fight. In fact, I have a great deal of anger within me. Anger at those who have forced men like myself into silence and submission for so long. Anger at those who have turned the Empire into what it is now.
You have not been on the battlefield, I assume.
Asks Eldarien.
No, I have not.
And you have not seen villages destroyed and innocents slaughtered at the edge of the sword.
I've witnessed the aftermath of such loss, though in less extreme form, in the lands marked by the rebellion.
Malrun says softly.
By whom? The rebel forces or the armies of the Empire?
Rorlane asks.
The answer should be apparent. Why would the people of Telmerion slaughter the citizens of their own towns and villages?
So they are doing even here on our own soil.
Eldarien says,
What they wish to be done in the lands of Tel Velfana.
It seems so,
Malrun confirms,
though it has not reached such a degree as there. I think that is because we have been stably occupied for so long already. Less drastic actions are called for, but it nonetheless seems a viable strategy for the Empire to eliminate the possibility of forceful resistance by pruning the population of those considered dangerous.
And yet, what is about to happen in Ristfand appears to be more than pruning.
Rolain observes,
I fear so,
says Malrun softly, sitting back down and running his hands through his hair.
By the way,
Eldarien begins, turning to Malrun.
How did you pick up on my trail and discover us here in Falstead?
We followed the path westward and gained information from an old man who lives in the woods.
Malrun answers.
Father,
Exclaims Rolain.
you did not harm him, did you?
That man was your father? He was mishandled, but unharmed.
Malrun says,
I am sorry. It was apparent to Ierendal that he was hiding information, and Ierendal threatened him. It was all I could do to restrain the Lord Deputy's hand. Your father did not betray you and withheld his tongue, though his expressions told us enough to assure us that Eldarien had been there, and thence travelled further east with one other man in his company. Combined with what we already knew of his origins in Falstead, and what we, partially wrongly, assumed of his relation to the barrow of Seragalaptes, we knew where to search. In the Highlands, we picked up on the trail of 2 men and increased our pace in the effort to catch up with you. This we did just outside of Falstead, on the eve of yesterday, and bode our time until this morning, when we made the capture.
Malrun pauses and sighs.
I'm sorry for everything.
It is in the past now.
Eldarien says,
No one in Igni was harmed either, correct?
We found no one in Igni who gave us any leads at all.
Malrun says,
It was only luck and intuition that had us travel along the western road, intuition about your destination and your intentions.
Well, you were partly right, and that disturbs me.
Eldarien sighs.
But what about our path now?
Rolain says, attempting to turn back to the earlier topic of conversation.
So far, those dear to us have been unharmed, but for how much longer? How long until Igni itself becomes a target? How long until the innocent men living in the countryside and the woods are seen as threats to the Empire's sovereignty?
I know not.
Malrun replies,
All we can do is act according to what we now know to the best of our ability and judgment.
I agree.
Eldarien says,
And what do you propose we do?
Rolain asks.
I will go with you where you see fit, and I trust your judgment.
I myself intend to make haste for Ristfand.
Eldarien says,
Someone must warn them, and we do not have the convenience of carrier pigeon. Then when there, we shall stand at the side of the people, come what may.
I agree with that course of action.
Malrun says.
Do you intend to join us?
Rolain asks.
What do you suggest?
Malrun asks, looking at both of them.
I think that you should instead travel west.
Eldarien replies,
Someone needs to take this information to those who fight for Telmerion in the lands already touched by war, and even to the capital itself.
Malrun nods and says,
That is what I had thought as well. I have travelled extensively in the lands west of the mountains, so it is clear that I would be the best candidate for this task. It is also true that I may yet be able to bring some influence to bear among confrères who still side with the Empire.
Be careful,
Eldarien says,
for if your activities are discovered, you will certainly be branded and hunted as an enemy.
Understood.
replies Malrun.
But I also cannot simply continue acting as I did before. I intend to inform both the rebel forces and any men aligned with the Empire with whom I may carry some influence. They need to know what we have witnessed today, so that they may judge for themselves and take appropriate action.
It is a dangerous path.
Rolain says.
Are you sure that you shall remain faithful in the service of the people of Telmerion?
Rorlane,
Eldarien says,
enough with the doubt and suspicion.
I trust not in my own strength,
Malrún answers,
but I can assure you that everything I have said to you today, I have said in truth. I am not going to sneak back to the Empire and betray the counsels we have shared together. Not as if it would make a significant difference anyway.
For me, it might.
Eldarien says,
Ah, that is true.
Rorlane replies,
I hope that today is the last time, Eldarien, that you find the firm hand of the Empire bearing down on you and pursuit hot on your heels. I shall do my best to make sure that is the case.
After a moment of hesitation, Rorlane says,
You have my trust, Malrún, and I expect you to remain faithful to it. I trust in Eldarien's eyes more than my own in this case, as I know that he sees more than I do of the character of men. If he trusts you, so do I. And you, truly, have given no cause to withhold this trust.
Thank you, Rorlane.
Malrún replies, visibly moved.
Thank you, Eldarien. I do hope that we see one another again, wherever our paths may lead us. Look for me with those who fight for the people of Telmerion, for once my matters with the Empire are settled, that is where I shall be.